Welcome back to Bleav in Softball. I'm your host, Jenna, and however you got here today, whether it was an audio podcast platform like Apple, Spotify, etc., or watching on YouTube, thank you. Subscribe and rate the show wherever you get your pods if you haven't yet. And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter/X at Bleav in Softball. That's BLEAV. And still merch available. Click the link in our bio on either of those pages, or go to shop.bleav.com to purchase 3 different shirts available for you, covering our bases. Safer out, and catch you soon. All right, let's go through today's batting order. First, we'll be covering our bases. I'll share some call-outs from the softball world. Then we'll head into today's interview with Brian Kolze, a unique one to reflect on his career of over 3 decades, coaching at Pacific, plus his experience on the NCAA committee with Team USA, etc. A lot to cover. Then we'll end things with the foul tip of the week, where we share tips to help us get better. All right, let's go. Covering our bases. BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Rip It Sports is where getting your gear starts. I wore my Ringer Turfs to every game of the Pac-12 tournament this past weekend as planned, and it was great. I mean, interviewing coaches and players on the field, they're made for it, for a reason. And Rip It has so many different types of gear for all parts of the game. But the best part, always their mission, to elevate female athletic performance. They understand that women and girls deserve gear specifically tailored to our needs, fitting right, performing well, and meeting our unique demands. Even better news, Rip It is offering an exclusive 15% discount. Just use the code Jenna15 when you shop at ripit.com. That's JENNA15. This is your chance to experience the same quality gear that helps so many women and girls excel. And the conference tournaments exceeded our expectations in a lot of ways. For me, being at the Pac-12 tournament, I had some just high-level takeaways. So many details I could go into, but just some good softball, first of all. The play itself on the field was just really fun to watch. 4 out of the 8 games were won by the team in the matchup that lost the regular season series. I think the softball gods also knew we needed one more Arizona and UCLA matchup in the Pac-12, and they saw that, right, in the semifinals. And then how about the Utes? Just a perfect example of this as well, beating Oregon and Stanford after losing to them in the regular season. And then the last one ever, yes, but UCLA also became the first to sweep both the regular season and tournament titles. The championship game with UCLA and Utah being a rematch of last year, but just a classic one-run game to close out Pac-12 softball, and it felt really on brand. Personally, too, because I was with Pac-12 Networks doing the broadcasts as an on-field analyst, I did get to interview for the quarterfinals 8 out of the 9 coaches on the field. It was sort of a last moment with each of them in this type of setting, and I got to give them hugs as well, and it was a nice way to kind of close it out just for me on a personal level. And then it was, of course, at the stadium I played in, right? Like, it being held at Stanford this season is definitely meaningful to me as an individual. And working with D1 softball there too, we sponsored an alum tailgate for Pac-12 softball alumni to come and just celebrate the conference and the history that it has. So it was a lot of worlds colliding for me. That was also really fun. And just the end of an era on many levels. And I'm excited to see these programs compete in their future conferences from here on out. The top 10 Player of the Year finalists have also been announced by USA Softball. 5 conferences represented. Only 3 pitchers in that group. I guess 3.5 if you include Claire Davidson, who has pitched in her career at Duke, but she took a step back from that this season. But I've also personally been able to interview 3 of them. Nyjah Kennedy, we all know, is a Believer, been on this show, but also Lexi Kilfoyle and Tiari Jennings with D1 Softball. And my D1 team has been able to interview Maya Brady, Carlin Pickens, Reese Atwood, Carly Spade, and counting. And all of that is to say that these players, especially after talking with them, are really easy to root for. So you can tune into those conversations to get to know them on the D1 Softball podcast, our social channels at D1 Softball, Twitter, Instagram, as well as the In the Circle pod. And half of those Player of the Year finalists, half of those 10, actually drafted by Athletes Unlimited. The class was 15 players total. It happened this week. 7 conferences represented, all Power Fives, including, of course, no surprise, 4 Oklahoma Sooners, plus the Sun Belt with Jessica Mullins at Texas State, and then MAC as well with Carly Spade, who's on both of these lists. So number 1 overall, though, was pretty interesting because it's last year's Player of the Year, Valerie Cagle from Clemson, but she actually became the first female student athlete at Clemson to be taken first overall in their respective sports professional draft. Pretty big deal. Cool that it was softball. And then special shout out also to another Believer, Charlize Palacios, and her and Sachelle, both of them Believers. Sisters are going to get to play together. If you listen back to the episode with Charlize earlier this season and the episode with Sachelle, back in season 1, they both talk about how special that would be for them. They got to play against each other when Charlize was at U of A and Sachelle was on Team Mexico leading up to the Tokyo Olympics. But now they have a chance to play together for the first time ever. And that's just a beautiful thing. And I do want to give a shout out to Ashley Miller from Northwestern as well. She was the Big Ten Pitcher of the Year this year. They were the regular season champs as well. And I actually got to see her throw in person at Mary Nutter this season. And I think she's a little bit underrated. So she's holding it down representing the Big Ten in this group. And then I can't bring it home, obviously, without talking about the bracket. Selection show Sunday was this past weekend, and some new things have come out to break it all down. So D1 Softball, we had our live selection show special. You can rewatch that from Sunday with live reactions with the whole D1 squad. Amanda Lorenz and I, my podcast co-host, also joined a live on Instagram with NCAA Softball. You can rewatch that from Tuesday, too. We actually make our picks and our predictions for this postseason bracket and analyze everything from the top to bottom. And then, of course, the podcast itself this week, Amanda and I interviewed the entire Florida coaching staff. So not just Tim Walton, but also Eric Thomas, Chelsea Dobbins, and friend of the show, Francesca Inea, after they won the SEC tournament and got the number 4 national seed. And that came out Wednesday. So catch up on all of that as well. And then in terms of what's coming up, on-site coverage at the Stanford Regional. That's what I'm doing this weekend with D1 Softball. Obviously some digital stuff, but also I'm putting my writing cap on, which I'm excited about. So make sure you go to d1softball.com for all the info for all of the regionals and follow along on our social channels. Nobody does it like them, especially our writing team. You guys, it is truly impressive, the amount of knowledge and information and stories that they pump out. So keep up with that. But then also someone else who had a hand in the bracket is actually today's guest. So let's head into the interview. He is a newly retired head coach at the University of Pacific for 32 years, Stockton Athletics Hall of Famer and member of the USA Softball Coaching Pool and the NCAA Division I Committee, Brian Kolze. Thank you for joining, Coach. I'm excited.
You're welcome, Jenna. Glad to be here. Different role coming on, but glad to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into all of it. And it was actually really nice to see you in person earlier this season when UOP played at Stanford in a midweek game. It was always nice to say hello.
Yes, it always is great to see you. Not always great to go lose at Stanford, but hey, that's part of the process, as we say.
Well, I think I actually had seen you too really early in 2020. Same sort of thing. Like you guys were playing, I think, in a preseason tournament at Stanford. And it was right before COVID hit. And then all the craziness happened. And then finally got to see you again recently. So that was interesting times.
Yeah, that's it. It was interesting. I've recovered. I don't know if anybody else or the rest of the country's recovered, but I'm kind of over it.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah.
But I feel like I remember that time when I saw you. So back then, one of your former players, Gina Carbonado, had just started at Santa Clara coaching.
That's
and I thought, right. Okay, because I thought you had gotten a text when we were chatting where she actually got thrown out of one of her first games, and you were just kind of laughing about it because I think you just know her so well.
Yes, I do. Ironically, she and I spoke there this past weekend, and she was letting me know that she had not been thrown out this year to this point. So she'll probably kill me if she sees this and I'm saying that, but it's kind of been a running joke that she and I have had over her years as a head coach at Santa Clara.
Oh yeah, no, it's funny because I think I saw in an article, it might have been celebrating your 30 years at the time. Um, and I want to say a quote from Gina said something to the effect of she doesn't know if she would have recruited herself back in the day, but she was so thankful that you did at Pacific.
Yeah, she was quite a gem. Obviously a tremendous talent, and she's doing a tremendous job at Santa Clara. Her future is very bright in coaching, and she was very under recruited, and she's one of those young ladies that made us look really smart.
That always helps.
Yes, it
right?
does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, I got to call some of her games too, and actually chat with her, and it was really cool to just get to know her a little bit. And I actually know a little bit of what it's like to be recruited by you back in the day.
Back in the day.
And yep, and I'll never forget because I went on an unofficial visit to both Pacific and Stanford in the same weekend. And like went to Stockton first, I think on like Friday or something, and then Stanford Saturday. And then you guys played each other at Stanford. And I distinctly remember sitting right behind home plate because I was like, I can't show any bias towards anybody. I'm going to sit right in the middle with my parents and watch this game. But I really enjoyed my visit at the time. I thought it was a really great experience.
Yeah, it's Pacific's been a tremendous place, and I think people are pleasantly surprised when they come visit the university and what it has to offer. And it's not a large school; it's a small private school, but it's aesthetically beautiful, Ivy League type atmosphere, very strong academically, very family oriented, and it's more than they expect because everybody expects when you have 4,000 undergrads, it's going to be the size of a high school, which is not the case. It's 175 plus acres, and it's they just think because of the student population, but the fact of the matter is the small class size is something that we are proud of in regardings to the actual relationships between professors and the student or the student athlete that enhances that academic experience. So the population is kind of kept at that so that we can keep that one-on-one attention in regards to the academic side at the university, no matter what your major is.
Yeah. I remember that being one of the things I liked about it too, in general. Academics was important to me, and I remember appreciating that sort of more intimate setting that the experience would have been. And I know you said that people are surprised, and it's more than they would have thought that it would be. Was it for you over 3 decades more than you thought it would be?
Well, the irony is that I'm from Stockton, and I grew up in kind of a semi-country community, and then even when I was playing junior college at Delta before I went on to Northridge, we would play fall ball against Pacific. So I think you kind of took it for granted because you lived here. And I grew up going to Pacific athletic events and so forth. I mean, going to basketball games and football games when they had it. And so I spent a lot of time going to Pacific events, but I think it's kind of one of those things you kind of take for granted because it's always there in your community. So you don't really notice it as much. But then when you come back and you're here, you really start to notice the beauty and the bullet points it has in advantage to some other institutions. So it's kind of that kind of perspective when you come back because you don't take it for granted anymore. So you learn more about it. I know when my stepdaughter ended up coming here and she went on the tour amongst other schools with my wife, my wife was asking a lot of questions because she had no idea, and she's from the area as well. And it's just one of those places that there's a comfort zone, and there's a comfort zone too because there's on the academic side, there's help wherever you need it, and on the personal side, there's so many great things to do once you get here.
I feel like it's very much personal to you. I have viewed you. It's almost like Mike Candrea at Arizona because I know that so many
I
people in the
wish
athletic
I had that success, but thank you very much.
well, it's just that you're the go-to person for essentially the entire athletic department. It's like if people have questions, they're like, "Oh, talk to Kolze," because you've been there so long. You're really an institution at this point, and it's far beyond softball. It feels.
It is. You know, I think the thing is you've, as ironically you say this because, I've retired from coaching, but I am going to stay on at the university. What that role is, I have no idea, because I have yet to meet with the athletic director and the president, but they've both spoken to me because I I look at it as I'm ready to be done coaching, but not done working. And if I have the opportunity to work in the environment that I've been at and help others, whether it's raising money, whether it's doing stuff in the community, uh, it's an arena I love, and I want to continue doing that. And I think that might be part of what you said, Jenna. Is one of the reasons to stay on is because as a resource of having been through a lot, you know, um, having been through when we had football, when we didn't have football, when we had higher enrollment, lower enrollment, the pandemic, uh, what I've seen as growth on the university. People come back after 20 years and they can't believe not only the continued beauty of Pacific, but the additions in facilities, whether they're academic facilities or athletic facilities. So you get that, new housing on campus, all those things that come into play, but you've been through it all. So if someone comes to you, you kind of remember what it used to be like and what it is now. And there's a lot of positives to push forward, which is not easy in the private school industry and in the state of California with costs and inflation, those types of things. But you have to continue to provide the positive side of what is available.
Yeah. I think I even saw on your 30th celebration a couple years ago how you were raising money for new bullpens, for example.
Right, which have not come to fruition yet, but it's not because of that. It's because where we're at in the structure of some moving parts on some other things that will lead into those things. Um, And of course, as you go, costs continue to rise. So you have to figure out how we play the shell game and move things around, to make everything work. But that was part of it. Um, the enhancements to the facility, which I've spent a lot of time spending money for the facility because what it looks like now versus when you visited is like a different planet. Um, but that's part of it. That's part of it. I've always taken that pride in trying to make things better and not just the student athlete experience on the field, but what they get to have to use as their tools and their arena to participate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. See, this is the reason why, for example, when Mike Kendra was named the interim AD when they were going through their transition at Arizona, I thought that was a cool moment for softball. But you're nothing, not to say anything against your AD. I'm just saying, if ever there was something like that, you're the type of person that has that sort of institutional knowledge beyond just your sport.
Well, I would have the knowledge, but I have absolutely no want of, of that level of decision making. We have a great new athletic director, Adam Shore. He's in his first year. Um, I see a lot of things moving progressively, and now that we're moving out of that pandemic era, we're starting to be able to do things a little differently and move forward. Everybody was kind of in a status quo holding pattern, um, you know, for most universities. Obviously, um, every state is different with that, but we kind of all know everyone in California, we're kind of all on the same page as we try to move out of that. And I really appreciate the things he's trying to do, along with President Callahan, um, with that. It's going to take time. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but I think there's a very serious and positive plan in place and how to get to where they want to go.
Well, that's good news. That's good to hear because I also happen to know that a lot of really great people have come through Pacific on your staff in particular too. Your coaching tree is pretty incredible. And I don't know if people know about it enough. The people who know. Like, the people really involved in this community in softball know, but I just wanted to highlight that because it truly is incredible.
Well, you don't get anywhere without hiring good people. And I think when you hire people, you let coaches coach. And
Yeah.
I've been blessed with obviously numerous assistants that have gone on to success. Um, and run their own programs, have been highly successful head coaches. Um, but I always felt, if you want to, if that's what you want to do, I'll help and try and get you there. And so you're always going to lose good people. But I kind of think that's kind of our job, you know. It's kind of what we're supposed to do. And if you want to do it, I'll help get you there. And I'm not going to hold anybody back from advancing uh, their own personal wealth or their own personal goals. I just look at it as like I told the team Sundays that I'm a teacher. It's just my class is outdoors. That's just pretty much how you look at it.
I saw you quoted as saying that recently, and I liked it a lot
Yeah.
because it's a really good way of putting it.
It's kind of how I looked at it. That's kind of how I look at it. I think a lot of coaches look at it that way. It's just, it's a little different at an institution like ours, getting, truthfully, to get to do a little bit more of that than, say, some of the larger BCS schools, because you got to learn how to pull a tarp. You got to learn how to drag a field. You got to
Yeah.
learn how to repair a mound. You got to teach your athletes how to do those things. It's part of their responsibility. Fundraising, community outreach, those things. It's a little different, but it's sometimes that way it's much more rewarding too. But when somebody leaves, they're pretty much prepared for everything.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
that's
they're
been
better
made.
prepared for everything that comes with it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that's been made very clear. I mean, for those that don't know that are tuning in, for example, one person that is talked about a lot is Heather Tarr, who earlier this year 800 wins as a head coach at her alma mater, which is really exciting, and obviously the head coach of Team USA.
Yeah.
And she was getting her start under you for I think 6 years or
Right.
so, right, on your
Mhm.
staff.
She was with me
Yeah.
for 6 years. It was for 6 years, and it was a great time. I mean, obviously, we still keep in touch all the time, and um, I do actually hear from her randomly about advice, and I'm like, "Well, you're competing for a national championship. I don't know what I'm going to tell you at this point." But sometimes it's more like fatherly advice, I think. But our relationship is tremendous, and as we keep in touch, you don't lose those ties. You don't lose those ties.
Yeah. I've had her on this show as well. I mean, I competed against her in college, right? And that this is one of my favorite parts, actually, is getting the more personal connections after having competed with or against people, Um, and I had actually asked Cindy Ball-Malone as well on the show, who coaches at UCF, as we all know, was one of your Hall of Fame players too. What it was like to kind of still have those ties with you, with Heather in the USA world too, in addition to obviously your college ties.
Yeah, it was fun because Cindy and I still keep in touch. Obviously, um, a little different, time wise, but her having 4 kids, it's like she's up till midnight anyway. That never changes with her, and highly successful career after she played here at Pacific, but highly successful career as a coach as well. And it was fun because summer before last, was it? What was last summer?
It sounds right.
22. All of us were on the team at Canada Cup, which was a lot of fun because we hadn't been together, and it was just, it was, yeah, it's a great experience, the coaching side, but at the same time, it was just, can't say anything, but it was just fun, and that's part of this because this job is very stressful at times, and sometimes you don't get to enjoy the moments as much, or the fun part of it. And that was very enjoyable, a lot of fun, a lot of time together. That we were just blessed to be able to get to do it.
Reunited. Yeah.
Yep.
Just cool to see. I remember when it was announced, I was so excited for the three of you. Just because for selfish reasons, honestly, in addition to just being happy for all of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It was fun. And then getting to work with Heather again uh, the next year in Guatemala, going with her there was a lot of fun too. Cindy wasn't on that trip, but Heather and I just getting to hang out again. Just it was just special, because now you look at it with restructuring, and how many times is Washington going to play in California with all the restructuring, and those types of things, that I can go watch some games, but at the same time it's like, when are they going to be here? It's not like they would
Right.
be in the Bay Area every year, that I could run over it, whether it was the trip to Cal or Stanford, or, those
Yeah.
types of things. Not that they won't be here for tournaments or anything like that, but you just don't know. There's so
Right.
much unknown in these next couple of years with all the restructuring.
Yeah, definitely. Which is why it's helpful to have the familiarity with some of the relationships that you've built
Hmm.
and that they've built.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting too because I've always thought of you as just being a breeding ground for great coaches, in addition to obviously your coaching players. So with Heather, it's like she was a coach on your staff that you helped develop in that way. Cindy was a player who then did spend a little time on your staff too, actually, and you helped her develop in that way. How do you look at it similarly when you're developing talent that's in the coaching space versus players, or what does that look like in comparison?
Um, yes and no. I think you're always developing the person. Um, because every player, whether we like it or not, some players have more talent than each other. You know, people always say that you know stars want to play, leaders want to practice. So
Mm,
you find the commonality of that, but at the same time, it's you're creating people, because you don't know what path they're going to go down. I've always said to recruits when they come in, is like, when you get there, like, what do you want to do? Because your parents always said, when you get there, you're going to know, and now you're there and you don't know. So I
yeah.
kind of have a basic philosophy of, if um, they come in, a third of them know what they want, and that's what they stick with. Let's just say they're from a family of lawyers, or they're from a family of like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to go to med school. They come in, they know what they want, and they want to stick with it. A third
Yeah.
come in and they know what they want, and they change their mind. Once they get in there, they get to explore other options. And a third of them come in, have no clue, and find out completely what they want. So really, the odds are you don't really know what you want once you get to college anyway. So let's see how we can create the balance and the time management, and create the person that can take
Yeah.
care of that business, that then can equate um, to understanding that once you get to the field, it's an outlet from everything else. Now you enjoy that moment, because we all find what we enjoy academically once we get to college, whether we thought we did or we didn't know what it was when we got there. Now we have to create the person that is molded to um, be the good teammate, those types of things, be the worker, because, I continue to preach, whether it's the athlete, or whether it's the coach, or it's the athlete that becomes the coach. There's a reason that the word work is in networking. Okay. And you need to work, and you need to network. The other thing is, and you always take the higher road, don't burn a bridge, because you never know when that boomerang is going to come back around and help you. And that's harder for people to understand now than it used to be. But
Yeah.
there are so many other options. They're exposed to so many other things, that they see that light probably later than earlier. So people like
Mm,
Cindy and Heather were where they saw those things earlier. Take Cindy
Yeah.
Ball as an athlete earlier. Gina Carbonado as an athlete for me and then coaching with me earlier, you know. So the sooner you see it, the sooner you learn it, the sooner you're going to grow faster in life. So you're always developing the player, but you're really developing the person at the same time, because they're not all going to go off and, you know, be all Americans. They're not going to all go off and go into coaching. They're all not going to go off and do the same thing. But the reality is, the better you are as a product when you get out there, the more successful you're going to be as a person, as a worker, as a boss, as a mother, you know, all those things. So you got to develop the person along with the athlete, and wherever it goes, it goes. You just help get them there.
Very well said. And you always struck me as somebody who saw that light early on. I mean, I know you had been coaching for a long time before you recruited me, but I remember when I called everybody who was recruiting me and told them that I had decided to go to Stanford, you were so gracious about it and excited. And I know that you were buddies with Coach Rittman, who was my coach at the time, right? So that I'm sure helps a little bit. But there were other experiences that were, there was a little more frustration and it was a little bit different. But I remember feeling actually good after talking to you, which I remember being like, that was actually a good experience. That was, I thought, very telling.
Well, let's see. So that was the summer going into your senior year, correct?
Yes.
And that
So that would have been
phone call was
2007.
on 7/06/07 is when you called me. July
Yeah.
6th of '07. And you're looking at me laughing. How I know that? It's because you called me in the car right after we had landed, my wife and I, for a wedding in Orange County that was on 7/07/07. And I remember that. You don't even remember that. And my players my players like, he doesn't forget anything. But
Yes.
the irony is when you asked me to do this, my wife was like, "So who is this?" And I told her, I go, "Do you remember that kid?" She goes, "That's who's doing this?" My wife remembers when I got that phone call. She doesn't remember the day, but I do. So,
Yeah.
but if you remember, one thing is part of recruiting is, you know, the recruit has to make a selfish decision for themselves. You know, there are going to be coaches that aren't going to be happy. There are going to be travel ball coaches that might not be happy with decisions. There are other, you know, the people that you say no to aren't going to be happy. You might even have a parent that isn't happy originally, you know, but it's still about you. And you, as the recruit, have to make the selfish, you know, you can be very unselfish, but you have to make a selfish decision for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. And that's kind of how I've treated it. But I've learned, you know, don't slam the phone, be gracious. You know, it is what it is. You usually get more no's than yeses anyway in this game, because if you need three players, you're not only recruiting three players. You know,
Right.
so you have to realize the percentages of no's versus yeses when it comes to the recruiting process.
It's funny how things are kind of like hitting, right? It's like, well, we can fail 7 out of 10 times and that's considered a success. It's funny how that translates to a lot of different things.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah. I love that you remember the date. So I didn't remember the exact date, but I will say I do remember talking to Coach Rittman on the 4th of July, which is why I remember that date, because I remember it being on the holiday. And I know I talked to you very shortly after that. So that totally aligns. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, because it's when we literally were in the rental car, on just leaving John Wayne when you called.
Yeah. Well, at the time, Laura Severson, her married name's Holmes now, but she was on your staff too. And I remember actually, she was great. And then Mike Hendrea's son actually was on your staff too at the time, speaking of.
Hmm.
But I remember seeing Sieves, as we call her, in the alumni squad, at Stacks, like at one of the breakfast places near Stanford, not long after you guys played each other on my unofficial visit. And she had obviously been speaking so highly of Pacific. And I was like, man, she's like really getting me to buy into this. And then I saw her there and she was wearing a Stanford sweatshirt because she was visiting friends. But I was like, hey, I just saw you in, orange and now you're wearing, she's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
It's my alma mater. I don't know what to tell you. I was like, okay,
Yep.
sounds good.
Yeah, Seaves was a lot of fun too. Did an excellent job as our pitching coach, and then went back to Stanford, and then got married and left the business, and that's okay because she's definitely probably making a lot more money than she ever did coaching. So
Doing, yeah, the
yeah, doing the
tech
tech
world.
world, which I don't understand at all.
I did that for a little while, just given where we're located after graduating, and obviously kind of made my way back to focusing fully on the sports stuff. But yeah, she's very impressive, and it was funny because she did end up being my assistant coach anyway, my sophomore year
Mm-hmm.
at Stanford. So worlds always colliding, but so many of those ties, like I was saying, kind of do end up going back to you. So many people that I've talked to, called games for, been recruited by, played against, they know you.
Well, it's funny because I was recruiting last summer, and it was at a tournament here in Stockton at a park, and we were up in the there's like a press box that you can rotate around and see all, and it was myself and like six other coaches, and I looked around, and every one of them I had either coached or I had recruited them as players. And we were laughing because it was like Stacy Newman was up there, Stacy Mae Johnson, who played at Iowa, who's now the head coach at Fresno. I recruited. She's originally from Reno. Uh, Vicky Rios, who's the associate head coach at Sac State, I tried to recruit. So it was funny. I'm looking around, and it's like you guys, like, we've known each other since you were like 18, and
Yeah.
it's funny. And I'm just the guy standing there, and you just don't really realize it. But man, when you're around a long time, you cross a lot of paths.
Oh yeah. See, even the names that you just mentioned, I just had Stacey Mae Johnson on the show very recently, like a few
Hmm.
weeks ago,
Hmm.
for example, and she was great. Stacey Newman's been on the show, and then even Sac State, I called their games and they played against Stanford and Cal this year.
Right.
So anything I'm doing, there's always some tie that goes back to Brian Kolze every time.
Yeah, well, if you're around long enough, you like I said, you cross a lot of the paths, and there's a lot of great people
Yeah,
in this game, and gonna miss them. But it's time to do some stuff for me too. Um,
yeah,
and I didn't call anyone for any advice on this. I probably should have called Mike Andrea because we had dinner in December, and I wasn't really thinking about it then, but it really started hitting me, in the middle of this season, like how much longer,
yeah.
with that, because there's never a good time. You know, we've got some great athletes that graduated this year, some great ones in the program. I'm glad I'm going to be around to at least see them play, periodically. Um, some of the parents want to stay in touch, so I said, just let me know when you're in town watching your daughter if I can run over to the field or whatever. Um, but it was time. It was time, and I'm totally content with that. I'm blessed that it was my decision,
Yep.
and that I'm still going to be working at the university in some capacity. Um, and it's nice to go out on your terms and to have the respect of the university that wants to keep you around, even though you're done coaching. But it's just part of life. It's part of life. Never ever thought when I got hired in my hometown in fall of '92 that I'd still be doing it there. And I had opportunities to leave, but I kind of like my niche. I
Yeah.
kind of like the niche that it provides. And I'm okay with that. The landscape that we're in that has changed tremendously. People don't realize this. And I know this is going to get asked probably by some people when I get to Indianapolis this weekend because they haven't been in the game as long. But when I started, over a third of the schools in the country that have softball did not have softball. There was no SEC. Some of the schools in the Pac-12 didn't have softball. Some of the
Yeah.
schools in the Big 12 didn't have softball. There was no ACC. There was no Conference USA. I mean, there's been like 110, approximately 110 universities have added softball since I started at Pacific, like a
Wow.
third of the country, which is crazy when you think about it for our sport. It's amazing how much it's grown. But at the same time, you're like, man. what great opportunities for the young ladies in our sport at this juncture now, because there is a place for everybody. It may not be where you want to go, but there are places. There are tremendous Division II programs too, that if you're not quite a Division I athlete, or they don't have the money or things like that, but there are opportunities. You just have to keep your eyes open and not take anything personal. And for any young recruit that's watching this, or their parents, I'm going to say one thing: don't be discouraged by who is not recruiting your daughter, but be enhanced by who is recruiting your daughter. Because everybody can't go to the same school. Everybody's not going to get to go where they think they want to go when they're 12, 14, 16, 18. But embrace who is recruiting you. Don't be discouraged by who is not recruiting you.
That's very, very good. That's a really, really good point. That's a really good point. Honestly, I'm a very anxious person, so I'm very surprised that throughout the recruiting process, I sort of had a little bit more of that mentality that I think was a saving grace. And it was, again, a different time than it is now. But I remember just being like, well, whatever works out is what's meant to be. I'm just going to be myself. And then however it rolls, that's how it'll be. I wish I was more like that in other aspects of my life, actually. But that's a very, very good point. Good advice.
Well, I care more about academics now because of the kids that I'm recruiting than I coach than I ever did when I was an athlete in college. So there you have it.
Yeah.
The whole academic component for me was, yeah. But now that I've been in it for 32 years. Like, yeah, it matters. It does. It matters.
And you played baseball in college, but then
Mhm.
you also played a little bit of men's fast pitch, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what made you want to get into softball at that time?
It's really funny. Ironically, I was on the phone yesterday with the coach that gave me my first opportunity, with Shan McDonald, because I started in January of '88 at UNLV. And
Yeah.
ironically, the '91 team I was on, that I helped was the assistant for, is going in the Hall of Fame this month, that went to the World Series. Because my last 2 years there, '90 and '91, we made it to the College World Series. In fact, we were year before last, my first year on the committee, we were sitting in Oklahoma, and I was sitting with Mike Andrea, ironically, during an Arizona game. This was after he had retired, but he was there watching Arizona, Caitlin Lowe's first team there. And Mike and I were sitting there, and they were making this announcement that the first College World Series was in Oklahoma City, was in 1990. And in 1990, Mike and I are sitting there. We were both coaching there at that first World Series. Me as an assistant at UNLV, him as the head coach. And we go, I'll bet you we might be the only two people out of 14,000 people that were actually in the stadium in 1990, the first time the World Series was played here. And we thought about that. We're like, how much it's changed, how much it's grown, all those things with the sport. So it's just amazing with that. But I just decided, be honest, I was an average baseball player in college, got involved playing fast pitch. And then what happened was, I had a couple friends in Vegas. And what I did is I went to UNLV, and I was going to work on my master's there because I had a free place to stay. The special teams coach at UNLV for football was a friend of mine, because when I was at Northridge, he had coached there. And he said, if you come, you have a free place to stay. Had a house, so I didn't have to pay rent or anything. So that saved a lot of money. And so I decided to go, started my master's program. Well, what I thought I was going to do was I was going to get my teaching credential. Okay. And I was going to go and be a high school coach and everything. Well, so I talked to Shan McDonald. She allowed me to go in as a volunteer, didn't know me from Adam. And I walked in. She allowed me to volunteer. She checked on my background. I was getting my credential. I was living with Brad Hoffman, who at the time was a special teams coach. And I started going volunteering, okay, for the softball program, going to high schools to do student teaching and stuff, and being with a group of people that wanted to be where they were at, and then going into a high school where people did not, 90% of them did not want to be in school. I knew right there that I need to do the college thing. And that's kind of what I did. I volunteered and I was there for 4 years. Didn't get paid the first year. People laughed. The second year, I made $8,000. My third year there, I made $10,000. And my last year there, I became full time at $14,000 a year as an
Wow.
assistant coach. And then I was offered, what happened was then what led from that is Sacramento State, Irene Shea, Hall of Famer in herself. They were Division I. They'd gone from Division II to Division I. She was retiring. Wanted me to come back and coach there with another young lady, Debbie Nelson, because I wanted to come back to California. And she was going to retire, and I knew I'd be a candidate for the head coaching job. So what happened was I came to Sac State. I was there 1 year. Okay. Debbie Nelson was the head coach, the interim head coach. I was the assistant coach. And the day I interviewed for the job at Sac State, I came home and on my answering machine, those days, that was probably the infancy of the answering machine in the early 90s. There was a message from the athletic director at Pacific that he wanted to interview me for their job because they had let their coach go. So I interviewed for both of them, sat around for about a month, didn't know what was going to happen, hung by the pool, played golf every night because it was 100 degrees every day, and was offered a couple of assistant jobs if it didn't work out at some pretty big schools. I got contacted by what are now Power 5 schools to be an assistant if it didn't work out. Then I got offered the Pacific job, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. Well, maybe you will get to play a little more golf and sit by the pool again. You can ask Kendrea what that's like now that you're retired, but that's incredible.
Mm-hmm. So, there's no reward without risk. And I took a risk and got in it and still in it.
Yeah. And you're right that it's evolved so much since then. How did you evolve with it this whole time?
Well, the first thing is there are a lot of great coaches that put this sport on the map, and I learned from a lot of them. Obviously, I started, with Shan, but she was good friends with Joyce Compton and Yvette Gerard. Talked to them, Carol Spanks, people that I would see on a regular basis. Then I would brainstorm with who we went to battle on the field every day, but Margie Wright and I would sit in the stands and talk softball on recruiting trips, when you're out recruiting, things like that. Linda Wells was great. She was friends with Shannon. I learned from her. And then, as it progressed, I learned that in my early stages. And then, you're just always learning, then Mike Candrea, did some talking with Ralph Weekly, and then you get to where your immediate peers, Coach Rittman, Tim Walton at Florida, those people that you keep in touch with all the time, and you bounce ideas off of them. And then you get your assistants, Cindy Ball, Heather Tarr, Kim Souter at Long Beach State. You start talking to them about things because they're closer in age to the kids. Like, how are you handling this? And you're just always talking, and trying to learn because, what you tell your team is like, when you guys die, you ain't gonna know everything about softball. Neither am I when I pass on. But the fact of the matter is the game's still going to be here and it's going to still be advancing. And, I had a great time with Carol Hutchins, because the first time I was with USA was like 05, and we were at Canada Cup, and I was one of her assistants. And this is right after she won the national championship. And so I'd never even met her. I mean, I knew her, but I'd never worked with her or anything. And we'd played against each other like twice, And 1 year it was classic. It's like we played Michigan, and this is when Marissa Young was playing there, who's now the head doing a great job at Duke. And it was down in the San Diego tournament, and we played them. And I don't remember if we won or lost, but the game was like 9-8. And she came over and was asking me like about hitting and stuff. And I was like, are you kidding me? You're asking me? I should be asking you. But she was just, it was just funny. Just people like that aren't above anybody to learn, just tells you a lot about the character of individuals. And just Mike Candreo has been great because he brought me in the first time to do some stuff with USA because, as a coach, you really got to check your ego in at the door, was the big philosophy. And, I was the little guy from Pacific, and, you have all these names you read about every day, but it was a great experience because it made me a better coach, made me a better person. And it taught me a little bit more about even keel, especially when you're walking in and you learn kids put the USA jersey on and they're nervous from the get-go because they have that along their chest. Now, how do you keep
Yeah.
them relaxed, especially for the first time? It's just like last summer, which might be my last stint, or last August, going to Japan,
Yeah.
with Coach Rittman. And we had Chris Malvo from Tennessee, who I've never worked with. Great guy. I know him. Mike Roberts, who I knew a little better because he had been at Washington at one time. And we're over there, and we have these, college kids playing against the gold medal Olympic team, and we just, as coaches, we're just like, how do we just joke around, like we have to keep them loose. So we're
Yeah.
throwing each other under the bus and stuff like that. And the players are like, do these guys even like each other? And it's like, you guys have no idea. It's just, how do you stay loose? Because in the past, you've seen people really tense up and not be able to perform. And you really need them to be the best player they can be,
Yeah.
and not be the best that they can be, not just because they changed the jersey. Because if they think about the jersey all the time that they're wearing, they're not going to be able to relax and perform. And that's part of our job, especially when they're first timers with
Yeah.
USA with that. So, but
Yeah.
because now, when the athletes come into your college program, a pitcher very well could get lit like she's never been lit before. And
Yeah.
hitters could go 1 for 16 and face 3 All-Americans. You're playing 7-inning games. You're not playing an hour 20, drop dead. You're not getting 1 or 2 at bats. No fault to that. I'm just saying the preparation is different, and
Yeah.
how they handle and bounce back from that is important, because the sooner everyone's going to be humbled. Coaches get humbled every day, so do the
Yeah.
athletes. So you have to deal with it. Sometimes we deal with it well, sometimes we don't. But at the same time, it's our job to try and get the athletes to deal with it a little faster and let them know, it happens to everybody.
Yeah. I've always been very impressed by how collaborative coaches are with each other. Like all the people that you just mentioned, that you guys are learning from each other, because it's so competitive on the field, obviously. But to see that sort of thing kind of come together off the field has always been, I think it seems special to me.
Yeah, well, I think you can't get better if you don't do that. If you pigeonhole yourself, you know,
Yeah.
um, you can't. You just you're not going to get any better. And that's where the whole ego thing is. Everybody has an ego when they're running their program. I mean, that kind of comes with it. But the fact of the matter is, the ego of you never stop learning, that's not going to get you anywhere, with
Yeah.
that. And I think the biggest thing with that too now, Jenna, is there is a huge separation with how things are moving in the landscape of college athletics. I
Yeah.
mean, think of Pacific with 100 less programs where they're at in the national landscape. Think where you're at with NIL money, transfer portal, all those things. Those things have hurt programs like mine. But at the same time, you need to, if you can't accept where you're at in the landscape, you're not going to get any better. So you
Mm.
still use some of the same resources to get better as a coach, but now you have to find sometimes some different ways to get some of the resources that you had. I mean, we've lost a lot of people in the portal. It stinks, but it is what it is. Um, and but you have to move forward. You have to be true to yourself, true to the program. It stinks. You hope administrators understand that, because there's places where you have to rebuild. You don't reload. And I'm just fearful that we're going to get to a point, which we very well might, that it's that handful and everybody else. And I'm more concerned about everybody else, not the handful, because the handful is going to do what they're going to want to do. That's the way it is. They do make the money. They're moving at a faster pace with more resources. But there's a lot of us at the other that we can continue to compete for conference championships, get a bid to the NCAA tournament, have still a positive experience on the student athlete, and we have to keep working forward with what we have versus what we don't have.
Right. Glass half full rather
Yep.
than half empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like it's helped, though, how involved you are just at a national scale with Team USA, obviously, but even being part of the committee, like we mentioned earlier. Um, that must be a very interesting experience, given all of your experience that you've mentioned and how much things have changed now.
Yeah. Well, I leave tomorrow. Fly out at the crack of dawn tomorrow. It is, but I will tell you, the committee work is very hard, very difficult, but I am completely impressed with who has been on the committee in my 3 years, because there's some turnover, because you can only serve for so long. I do think a coach's perspective helps.
Yeah.
And there's 3 coaches on the committee. And, but it kind of comes down to, sometimes we can get information that the other people can't get, because they'll ask a question and we'll know. But the committee people have been tremendous. They are highly fair, highly ethical, uh, not stereotypical of what people would assume. I'm really looking forward to getting in the room with this committee, because there's some new people who I've enjoyed working with and respect, and trying to get their perspective from other parts of the country, different conferences. And that's how it's been from day one, from when I was on. It's a blessing and a curse. We have a bye, because this is our graduation weekend.
Mm,
So I'm able to be there where the other ones are in their conference tournaments.
right.
Um, so there is a coach in the room. It doesn't mean I'm a decision maker. It's just I'm a different source of information, and
Mm,
the other coaches are feeding me. Sometimes it depends on if they get eliminated or not, if they're able to come in and join the meeting in person. But
mm.
like I said, the committee I have found to be highly fair, highly ethical, extremely hard. The parity this year is just nuts, and it's why everyone's tries to say this, and this, but it's just like, I just don't. Nobody predetermines anything. I mean, it is the turn. It's just the like I said, the parity is amazing. It is so great for the sport. Sure, there's been one or two dominant programs who are still dominant, but the difference is, there's more teams having great years. So that's where it gets difficult with that. With that,
People have a lot of opinions about, the
sure,
field of 64, the selection show, all that stuff every year. But I can imagine it would be very difficult for a lot of us with opinions to actually be in the shoes of having to make some of those decisions.
yeah, it's nerve wracking and exciting at the same time. Um, but it's it's driven to try and get the best 64. And there's probably more teams, just like anything else, that probably are in that mix than ever, but you only get to have 64. So you're
Yeah.
going to make friends and enemies in the same day. That's just kind of how you look at it. But it's exciting. It's something for me that I'm glad I've experienced, because I understand things more about the sport. Don't know how I will still be involved in maybe giving to the sport when I'm done coaching. I still value the sport to a high level. It's been half my life, and far more pluses than minuses. I mean,
Yeah.
far more great things than bad things, far more peaks than valleys. So, and it'll always be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know this will come out after the selection show has dropped and everybody finds out what the field of 64 is going to look like. But I know that this is helpful for even me, just as somebody who covers the sport and even who's competed and been part of the field of 64 before, like
Mhm.
what actually goes into it. Is there anything else you want people to know?
Um, just that I think whether people believe it or not, everything does get taken into account, with selections. It's painstaking. Um, it's it's nerve wracking even for us, and it takes much more time than anybody could anticipate
Yeah.
with that. And though we're tracking things as we go through, um, and it's really, you know, the cake is the easy part. It's the frosting when you get, because 32 teams are in no matter what. They
Yeah.
win their conference, they're in. Now it's
Yeah.
the other 32 teams, and then it's like, well, how many upsets were there? So that's what the common person knows. But at the same time, it's there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's it's getting those other 32 is the hard part, because there's more than 32 teams you're considering, I can tell you that.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
so it's going to be exciting to see who gets in this year. And who knows, if we don't know, is someone getting in for the first time? Don't know.
Yeah.
Is someone getting in for the 30th year in a row? Don't know. Is somebody getting in that hasn't been in 15 years? Don't know. I mean, that's literally how it is. We all think we know what's going to happen, but I learned a long time ago, just like when you play the game doesn't know who's supposed to win,
Yeah.
and so you get in there, and it's like every literally every couple of hours, it's like, oh boy, like this happened or what, and it's not like you go in and you set it and you just sit around. No, it's I do hope, though, that we get to, don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not. I do hope we get to the point where we're allowed to potentially, and I know they're doing it with soccer and volleyball this fall, of seeding 32 teams versus 16 teams, or,
Mm,
half the field versus 25% of the field, because I think
right.
that will help enhance the sport even more. Um, because then you pull out the mileage limitation that you're forced to deal with in some of the region, in the regional selections.
Right.
Now, I won't be on it, but I'm really interested, and I'm probably thankful I'm not on it when we get into these conference realignments, because then you're going to come into, and I know it's something in our July meetings, that I'm sure is going to be discussed, but we're going to then have to start the discussions on, you know, two teams from the same conference in the same region, because it's just it's how it is. And it's
Yeah.
like, so the games moving forward, I won't be part of that, but then there'll be other issues that come into play when you come into seeding and selections and so forth like that. And it's nobody's fault. It's just you have to address the changes that have happened in the sport. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, your alma mater is going into the ACC. So how are you going
Right.
to deal with that? But the one thing that is um, interesting is that does make it difficult in our sport. Um, everybody doesn't play each other in every conference. So then you
Right.
have to take that into account too. And that's a whole different line item that the selection committee has to deal with. And that's why you have regional committees, because they're doing all the homework on their regions and so forth, that give you the information quicker when you get into the room for that. But it's a great experience. Like I said, it's painstaking, but it's in the end, I truly believe the committee does the best job that they can, and because nothing's apples to apples anymore.
Yeah. Right. Well, it certainly makes me feel better knowing that you are on the committee. I will say that.
Well, let some other people know that it's not. I didn't do it for that. I did it, to represent, because I thought as a coach, I have uh, the coach's perspective, the eyeball test. You know, um, if anybody would accuse Pacific Coach of having an agenda going in there, they'd be crazy, because I have no agenda. Like, our season's over and we're done, and we've seen a lot of the teams, but no, I think that the people they get on this committee are high quality individuals. They're very fair, much fairer than even when I walked in the first time. I just figured stereotypically I would think this or this, and that wasn't the case at all. Very open minded, very open dialogue, very fair. The people with the NC2A do a great job with it, monitoring it and enhancing and pushing things through, as do the members of the committee.
Yeah. That's really good to hear, especially from what I consider to be a reliable source.
Well, thank you.
Well, I could talk to you all day. In fact, I would if I knew that you didn't have to go to work, and if I didn't have work.
Yeah.
But I do this wrap up with everybody that comes on the show. It's just a game called Safe or Out.
Okay.
So I'll bring up a topic related to softball. If you like it or you agree with it, you call it safe. If not, then you call it out.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about being thrown out by the umpire because you are the umpire.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, we've touched on this a little bit,
Sure.
but for the record,
Yeah.
conference realignment,
Mm-hmm.
safe or out.
I'm out. And this is why. I know why it's being done. Everybody knows it's being driven by a couple of sports. That's okay. But the Olympic sports and the sports that are playing multiple days every week, that's where it's really, really not going to be cost effective, not academic and efficient. And those
Mm,
are the people that it's going to be hardest on.
yeah.
Traveling 2,000 miles to play a 3-game series, which is basically a 5-day trip, a day to go, 3 to be there, 1 to recover. That's difficult,
Yeah.
and we're not flying charters.
Right.
So I understand why it is. I'm not saying that 5 years from now it might not be different again, but I'm out on it. I'm out on the conference realignment that is not regionally based.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
university based, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yes, it
Like, if
does.
there was realignment in certain parts of the country, like this team goes from Conference USA to, or like take Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, that's one thing.
Sure.
But when you have West Coast schools going to East Coast conferences and vice versa, that's where it's. I actually, be honest, for sports like softball, I don't know if that actually improves the student athlete experience versus deterring it, due
Mm,
to how it's going to change academically, physically traveling, the number of days on I don't know. I'm not going to live it, but at the same time, I don't know how it could be a positive on a weekly basis.
yeah.
But I understand why it's happening. I understand what's driving it, and maybe we'll get to where one sport is removed altogether and maybe things make a little bit more logical sense, not financial sense, because there is a
Mm,
difference.
yep. All very fair. All very fair. All right, the last one is bat flips. Safe or out?
Safe.
Okay, because you said yourself you're old school, so I
I'm
wasn't
old
sure.
school. I'm old school, but I think anything that the game has changed a little in that it adds some flair to the game. I prefer it if it's like for a win, not just like every home run you hit,
Yeah.
so there's a timing to it per se. I also understand that the game in those degrees is probably going to become a little bit more colorful. I just hope that it doesn't get out of hand in regards to it happens every time or it's derogatory towards the opponent, because I don't think bat flips are unsportsmanlike. I get worried if bat flips and some of the flair that might come into the game like other sports creates a lack of sportsmanship. And we still need to figure out how to be, humble in victory and proud in defeat. But I understand the excitement of today's youth too, by what they see, the trends. I totally understand that. So I'm not against it. I don't think it's an everyday occurrence, but a bat flip on a walk-off or something like that, I totally get it. I totally
Yeah.
get it. And it's not bad. It's just, is it the right time to do it?
Yeah.
Those types of things.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the sportsmanship, you bat flip when you're down 7-0 on a home run. You kind of figure out you're down by 7. Now you're down 7-1. But
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to discourage excitement out of today's youth. And I think we need that because it does help when we get in the games. But
Yeah.
yes, I am a little old school, but I don't think the bat flip in excitement is a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
not a disrespectful. I think people they read into it what they want. But, if a kid hits a walk-off and bat flips, I get it. If it's against
Yeah.
me, I get it. It's becoming part of the game. It's just I hope
Yeah.
we can continue to contain sportsmanship within the game.
Yeah. When I first started asking that question, pitchers were very clearly out on it, but actually even pitchers have warmed up to it a little bit as the game continues to evolve. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad this is going to be. When is this going to air?
after the Field of 64
Okay.
comes out.
Hopefully I won't be in too much trouble then.
You shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. Well, thank you, Coach. This was great. Honestly, I've wanted to do this for years. I'm glad that we just got to catch up, let alone record it. So just really appreciate you joining. And I'm also very excited to see what you do and how you continue to give back and pay forward in this game, because I know you will.
Well, thank you, Jenna. It's been a pleasure. And if this is after the Field of 64, best of luck to those 64 moving forward after selections on Sunday. And then
Sounds good.
8 of them I'll see in Oklahoma.
Yes, and I will see you there too. I will be at the World Series.
Awesome. Well, we'll see. If we don't see each other before, we'll definitely see each other then.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Jenna.
I first talked to Coach Kolze about joining the show back in the first season in 2020. We finally made it happen 4 years later. And if you didn't know about him, you were missing out. So I'm glad that we could help correct that for you. And with that, let's transition to the foul tip of the week. This week's foul tip is about flexibility. This theme has come up a lot recently, especially when I've been talking to coaches throughout the season. UCLA in particular has faced a lot of adversity this year. For example, they've had injuries, they've had games get canceled. And Kelly I said, the game plan is that good talent is flexible. That was the game plan because there were so many things that they couldn't predict that's what they knew that they could rely on. Coach Kolze now figuring out what his role is going to look like after retiring as a coach after so many years. The Pac-12 as we know it is going away. So it's a new era for collegiate athletics. And then even little things, like there were some technical issues, for example, when I was the on-field analyst with the wireless microphone and the earpiece at the tournament, and the audio wasn't working properly with one of the coaches we interviewed with D1 softball recently. And we joked about it, how, well, good talent is flexible. That was the first thing that we said. So big and small, we have to adjust. That's what it's all about. And we talk about making adjustments all the time in this sport, but it's true in life too. So the only thing that's certain is that change will happen and we'll need to adapt. So might as well accept it and roll with it. So that's it. Good talent is flexible. That's the foul tip of the week. You've been listening to Bleav in Softball, part of Bleav Network and presented by BetOnline. The show is available anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you listen, including Bleav.com and YouTube too. Subscribe to the show, rate the show, and if you liked it, write a review. Follow us on Twitter/X and Instagram at Bleav in Softball. Again, that's BLEAV. You can reach out to me personally on Twitter/X at JennaBecerra01 and Instagram at JennaBecerra as well. As always, thank you for tuning in and catch you soon.